I'm going to put together a video on the basics of how we might be able to implement the chess score system for competitive wargaming. So what I'm going to do is show you what the basics of the formula are, how they can be implemented in a league setting, and we'll talk about putting that in action and in the future how we might be able to do that. So if you want to make your own league, follow along with how I do this. This is a very basic form, and I'm sure there are people out there who can figure out how to automate this, but this is the basics. This is the brute force method. So a few things to understand. This system of keeping score in two-player games was developed by RPAD Elo, hence Elo system. It was adopted in chess in the 1960s. And we're just going to steal his formula and make use of it ourselves. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you the different variables and what they mean. This whole thing is based off of an interaction between two opposing players and what their previous ratings were compared to each other. And what it also does is it takes those ratings and it calculates what the expected outcome should be. And what that means essentially is that when two players meet up, one is typically going to have a higher score than the other one. It's very rare that players have the same score. So what the formula does is it says, okay, if this person has this score, there's a certain percentage of the time that they should win. And it calculates that. And that's what expected score means. And once we put through the variables, which I'll show you in just a second, it punches out a new score for each player. So the first thing we need is a unique variable Q. And each player gets their own Q value based on their previous rating. And I don't know why it's called that. And I don't know how Elo came up with this formula, but bottom line is it works. And I'll be able to demonstrate that to you. So we go 10 to the power of player A's score divided by, and the Q variable for player B is the same thing, but with their score. So this isn't actually how you punch it into Google Sheets in this place. I'm just showing you basically how the formula works, and then I'll show you how to punch it in. So what we need in order to get our new score is to calculate the expected score for each player. And so to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to take that new variable. So for player A, we're going to take variable QA and divide it by the sum of QA and QB. And then we need the expected score of player B. And so we do exactly the opposite. And then finally, part of the calculating method he used is you have to keep track of win, loss, or tie. If it's a win, it's 1. If it's a loss, it's 0. If it's a tie, it's 0.5. And that goes into calculating the result. And ultimately, the result is calculated as the new score for player A is the old score plus K, which is a variable that is set as basically a cap for how much a player's score can change. For us in this league, we're going to use the basic. We're just going to model the chess format, and the most that a player can win or lose is 32. So we're just going to call it 32. In the future, if we want, we can mess with how to change those variables depending on rankings of players, because in chess, if you get to a certain level, then the max adjustment is 16, but we're not going to worry about that. So you multiply 32 by the result minus their expected score. And then for the results for player B, you do the same thing. And the S variable for player B is going to be the opposite of player A. So if player A got a 1, player B gets a 0, vice versa. And if they tie, they both get a 0.5. All right, if you're a math person, you can see that both of these will end up adding together. They'll equal 1. So that is basically the percent chance that the player will win. And that goes into calculating the ratio of points out of 32 that they'll get or lose. When we actually put this together in the system, it'll look something like this. So these are our variables, as we talked about before. And we are going to take these variables that we talked about before and make them work in Google Sheets. For this one, pretty straightforward. It is 10 to the power of, and this is going to be RA right here, divided by 400. Boom. We'll do the same thing here. And then this will be RB. All right. The expected score, okay, based on what we have up here, its expected score is going to be, so it's going to be QA divided by the sum of QA and QB. And then we'll do the same thing with the other side. Okay, with the win results, we're going to have to enter these in manually. I know there's probably a way where when results come in, you can automatically code it so that it does it, but I haven't done that research yet. So we're going to go with just entering that in manually, and then we will plug in the results. So here we've got the original score plus 32 times player A's result minus player A's expected score. And then we do the opposite here. So now we have our basic setup here. So when we get our results, what we'll do is we will enter in their previous scores and the results. So let's say one player has a score of 1,000. They just started off. And the other player has a score of 1,200. They've been playing for a while. As you can see here, with the expected scores, player A with 1,000 is calculated at having about a 24% chance of winning. So the second player, player B, has about a 76% chance of winning. That represents player B having a much higher score. They have more experience, hypothetically more skill. So they're more likely to win. Let's just go ahead and assume that player B wins. Okay, they're hypothetically the better player. So when they win, player B does not get a whole lot of points, and player A doesn't lose a lot of points. But watch what happens when we switch this around. So let's say player A, who has a much lower chance of winning, wins, and player B loses. So as you can see here, this time around, player A gained a higher amount of points compared to the loss. If they would have lost, they would have lost 8, but they won, so it's 24. And that works inversely with player B. So what that means is their lower ranked players are not penalized as heavily for playing higher ranked players, and higher ranked players don't get as much from going around and clubbing seals. So it's not worth their time compared to playing higher ranked players, especially because a game of 40k takes more than 2.5 hours. So they can make a much better use of their time. So how does this work in practice? I will go ahead and show you a sheet that I've been putting together. Okay, so here's the sheet that we'll be using for our Nebraska Elo League to test out this whole system. So I've got this set up right here. This is where the rankings will be. And I've got my formula right here to enter in. And I've got a form that is on the website. So when players send me their information, it will populate this form response. So let's say that player A submitted their score and they won against player B, who lost. This would come in, so I would see this and check it off and come back to my standings here. Let's say prior to this, Bam Hunter had an Elo score of 1,000 with 0 games played. Tim Royers also just starting off the league like that. So they play each other. So player A won. So this was their starting score. Player B lost. This was their starting score. We enter in the variables and we have our new scores. Based on that, what I'll do is go in and update those. All right, just like that. We'll clear that out. And let's say we get another game in. Player A enters in the score and they lost to a repeat player. So I take this. Gotcha. All right, so we have another player in here. So prior to this, they had 0 games and then they played. Player A had 1,000. Player B had 984. Player A lost. Player B won. And we got our new scores. So now player A has 983 with 1 game And player B has that new score with 2 games. And there we go. As these games are coming in, it's a very simple thing to reload them. So you go to sort range, go to advanced, we got a header. We're going to sort these by Elo score, reversed. And if there is a tie in Elo score, it'll go to games played, also reversed, and it'll come out like that. And you can do that each time. Now, I've got this set up so that this chart goes directly to the website. So we've got this website set up, and the standings will be updated live. Every time you come to the site, it'll refresh and give you the current standings. We also have our rules, and you enter your game results through this as well. It is password protected. You have to join the league in order to participate, and you'll have a password sent to you. And that sign up form is on here as well. Simple as that. Again, the reason why the Elo system works so well is that it is a truer measure of skill. When players interact, their rankings determine their new points, and they are rewarded for playing more difficult games, and they are punished in the long term for playing easier games. Because of that, it behooves players to test their skill. So the scores then represent experience and consistent skill, whereas the ITC system is heavily skewed by factoring in the amount of events that a player travels to. Points are given based on the results of individual tournaments. So the more events that a player travels to and the more opportunities they have to place higher. Under the Elo system, you have to keep competing, but you don't have to keep traveling across the country, bouncing from tournament to tournament in order to do that. It's still good to do that. It doesn't de-incentivize that, but it's not required. It's much less of a pay-to-win scenario. And I know this is harsh criticism, but the point is, I'm trying to show how the Elo is a much more accurate way of determining skill for a wargamer. It's a display of skill. And over time, it takes into account luck. Another benefit of the Elo system is that the data are much more meaningful for amateur players, whereas in ITC, it's basically useless for amateur players. If you're not traveling to all these tournaments, then your score doesn't really mean a whole lot. You're just paired to an entirely different set of people. Whereas with Elo, you can watch your score go up and down relative to the players that are close to you and above you and below you. In addition, with the Elo score, it also has a better set of data for analysis of players. In the future, we could compare Elo scores based on factions and clubs and regions. It's also an easier way to keep track of a win-loss record. If we wanted to, we could plug in another column that shows a win-loss record. I'm not sure if that's necessary, but it might be something we do in the future if people ask for it. It's also a much simpler formula, and it's a lot easier to make adjustments and is out in the open, so people know exactly what's going on. ITC, I don't know. I'm not sure how their formula works. You can predict it to an extent, but who knows? The Elo system is also a way to make events and matchups much more fair. You can match players up based on skill level, and they're rewarded for that. Whereas in ITC, it actually disincentivizes lower skilled players from competing at events, and it incentivizes higher skilled players beating up on lower skilled players, which isn't as fun for anybody, unless you're a sadist, I guess. The Elo system also offers the opportunity for tiered tournaments. You could have different parts of the tournament, different brackets that are based on Elo score. You could have tiers, whereas in ITC, like I said before, it's basically an opportunity for good players to clobber seals and chase them out of the hobby, which we don't want to do. Wouldn't it be much more fun for more casual players to still go to a tournament and play those of their relative skill level and be just as likely to get rewarded as the higher ranked players who are playing those at their skill level? So overall, much better. At this point, I think it's just a technical thing to try out. We have to just try it and work out the bugs and see how it goes, which is why we are announcing the Nebraska Warhammer 40K Elo League. It will be based in Nebraska and the surrounding areas. So for the time being, you can enter in a request to be part of the league if you live in Nebraska, Colorado, Kansas, Iowa, Missouri, or South Dakota. And the reason for that is our team who will be updating the scores is quite small, so we need to limit ourselves. We'll be updating the data as we go, and we'll be doing updates on the YouTube channel. Make sure that you are subscribed and you keep up with that as well. And we'll also have discussions as to how the league is going, how we can fix it in the future, what's going well, ideas on how to implement this on a wider scale, etc. So with that, it is my sincerest hope that Elo will gain traction in 40K, and this league will serve as a test, a demonstration that Elo is possible and functional and fun. So thank you for listening. I look forward to answering questions and engaging in the future and seeing you in the league. Bye-bye.